So here's the deal. Most dads today feel stuck, overwhelmed, like a shadow of the man they once were in their primes. And that's not okay. We're taking back the dad flag and creating a movement of men who will be strong leaders for their family, strong physically for their health, strong mentally for their careers, and strong internally for a balanced life. We are Dadstrong, and this podcast is for you. All right, so sitting here doing a podcast with local superhero Matt Hyde. Doesn't have his mask on, and you can actually see that if you're watching the video. But Matt is a community leader here. He is one of the pastors at Discovery Church in Boise. He's become a good friend over the last year of knowing him. And he's got a dad. He is a dad. And we've been kind of on a similar journey on different parts of the spectrum. But one of the things we talked about last week over coffee was this idea of transformation and transition and torture and endurance, and all those things happen to be synonymous with each other. And I just thought, man, what a great podcast idea to do. What a great conversation. And each of our journeys has developed even further than when we spoke last week. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that. I mean, men today, at least the American dream is, you get to a certain point and then you're good. You're set. You've got your house, you've got your wife and kids and car, and all that stuff's good. And then you get to kind of cruise on to whatever, whether retirement and get in your Winnebago and travel the country once you got your pension, and you're good. But, we're on this side of those things, and I don't know. I don't see my journey ending in that way. I don't really want it to, but I also desire change. And I don't know. Talk to me a little bit about what change means to you. What did transformation mean to you? And then what does it mean to you now that you're starting to go through the stripping process of all this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's kind of the full picture of it, I guess. I think, the transformation process for me really started 15, 16 years ago when it was longer than that. 20 years ago, when I just began to crash. And honestly, I was a decent student in high school, and I desperately wanted to fit in. We moved to we moved to Boise when I was the tender age of 9, turned 10 years old, from what I thought was like the greatest place ever to live in. Little ski resort in Montana. It was incredible. It was beautiful, and all that was kind of pulled away at that age. And so there was always something in me that that really wanted to fit in, that wanted to feel like I belonged. And you get a little bit of you get tastes of that here and there. Like I felt it in some sports when I was part of soccer teams and basketball teams. Like I would get this like glimmer of what that felt like. And then life goes on, and you begin to grow up, and you begin to believe lots of things about yourself. And a lot of those things end up being false. And so I picked up a lot of that stuff, and I realized later, so I don't know if it was something I put words to or somebody else put words to, but they're like, man, you're like a chameleon. You just figure out how to fit in wherever you are. And at first I thought that was kind of cool, and then I realized at the root of that, a lot of that had to do with the fact that I didn't really know who I was and what I was and what life was about, and it was kind of scary. And so I just got I was almost like that gave me permission to get even better at that. I believe there's a gift in that.
Yeah.
But that's because of growth and part of the journey that I've been through. So yeah, that transformation process in a lot of ways started, just in crashing. In high school, I got into drugs and alcohol, and that continued in college. And a lot of that was wanting to just kind of numb out and silence those questioning voices that I felt inside. And you can only keep those things quiet for so long, in my experience. It's kind of like shaking up a soda, right? You shake it up and you can let it sit for a while, but eventually that pressure has to be released.
Yeah.
And so, that just kind of continued through college and really struggling. And, I always joke frequently, I think that some people figure out that there's a rock bottom, and then some of us who are really tenacious figure out that there's a rock bottom below rock bottom, right? Maybe a couple of them. There's like a shelf, a soft rock bottom, but I did that in a lot of ways. So that transformation process started in feeling like you hit something and you feel like you can't go any farther. And you can't undo everything that you've done. I couldn't unhurt the people that I had hurt, my parents and some close family members and things that, I couldn't undo that. And so that was kind of the beginning of the transformation process. To me, it was the reality of looking myself in the mirror. And I don't know that I actually did this, but, realizing the desperate state of, wow, I have made a colossal mess, and I don't really know where to go.
Yeah.
And that was kind of right at the surface level for a while, and I was still using drugs and things to kind of numb that place. And, as much as I was just saying this to a friend after lunch, as much as we would like to avoid painful and hard situations, there's no other way. I recently went through the experience of losing my dad, and this last year has been the most difficult year of my life. And on the one hand, I want to say I don't ever want to go through that again. On the other hand, I would not be where I am sitting here with you today if I hadn't been through that. And you kind of want to say to people you care about, or even people that you don't maybe like or care about, like you would never wish certain things on other people. And at the same time, I want that for other people. I want to be able to realize in the middle of painful and difficult moments that there's purpose in that pain. That beyond that pain, beyond that suffering, beyond that struggle is it's what you said. There's a different level of endurance. And if we can't embrace those things, you want to talk about broken, right?
Right.
When we stiffen up and we try to resist those things from happening, from my perspective, my limited experience and perspective and what I have the opportunity to see in other people's lives, it just breaks us in a whole other way. So I don't know. I guess that's been part of that transformation process, and there is no part of my life that is untouched by these experiences. I'm married. I have an incredible wife. I've got 3 incredible boys that are balls of energy, and they make me crazy, and yet they stretch me in a whole lot of other ways. And every little bit of it is a struggle, but I've had to come to that place of realizing that it is so worth the fight. It is so worth the struggle to see all of that other stuff stripped away from me so that I can continue to get at the heart of who I am. And from my perspective, seeing and trusting and believing God's purpose for my life. Because I know what it's like to live without that. I lived without that. I looked for answers everywhere. I'm a researcher. I'm really good at looking for answers. I'm pretty good at finding them. Deciding is harder because once I commit to something, I'm kind of in. My wife teases me all the time, like, can you just not jump in the deep end? Like, can we ease in from the shallow end? And I can't. I don't know how to do that, right? I just don't know how to do that. I know how to get tired and feel like I'm sinking in the deep end. I'm pretty comfortable with that. I'm pretty comfortable with other people having to rescue me when I get in way over my head. But that's part of what that transformation process has looked like. There is a stripping away that happens, and there is a need to see the truth and the reality of things. And a lot of times it's not what you expect.
Yeah.
It's not what you anticipate. So I'll get real kind of raw in this, I guess. I haven't talked about this very much, but I was at a men's retreat probably 10 plus years ago, and I was the speaker that year was talking about what it looks like to father, and what it looks like to be a spiritual father, to put into other young men and young women, to care for them like they're your own, to desire to see them succeed above and beyond what you could ever personally achieve. There's a level of selflessness in that. And one of the first things I can really clearly remember God speaking to me in that space was he said, "You will father your father." And I mean, I kind of know what that meant. You know, my dad didn't at the time have a relationship with God, and I just kind of took it as one of those promises that, like, I'm going to get to walk that with him. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to get to walk out things. And you know, my relationship with my dad was, I didn't know him really well most of my life. He traveled a lot of times. We didn't really have a deep relationship. And so I had imagined all of these things of what that could mean. Like, we were going to have this deep, great relationship. And, you know, this is over a decade ago, right? So I'm starting to think to myself, I'm envisioning what that could potentially look like, I guess. Well, as years go by, it's easy to forget about that stuff when you don't see things happening. Right. When we're in the middle of a process, because we're not reaching the end of a process, and sometimes it's unclear, we don't know where we are in the process. Things get kind of mixed up. We get turned around. There's no perspective, and you just can't quite see it, right? It's kind of the old analogy of you're hiking through the trees, and you just can't see anything until you get up above and you can really see the expanse of what you've been through to give yourself some clarity. So years go by, and I don't give up on praying into that promise, but you know, my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then a kind of a more dramatic element of Parkinson's called Lewy body dementia, which is significantly worse. Rather than your physical body deteriorating, it is still deteriorating, but your mental state and your capacity to function and process your brain is deteriorating more quickly than your body. And you know, there's some really raw moments in that for me, because I was walking alongside of my dad, and I was taking him to the bathroom, right? Like in restaurants and things, because his balance was off. So just the way my dad did with me as a kid, taking me to the bathroom and making sure I was safe and okay, I was now doing those things for my dad. Now, that thing that I believe that God had spoken to me years ago, that was kind of a distant memory. I hadn't even remembered that. Mm-hmm. I kind of forgotten about it. And more of this happens. My dad falls, and I'm in the bathroom helping him clean up his cuts. You know, I'm cleaning him up and caring for him. We're going to the hospital because of injuries that he's got, and we're making sure that he's cared for and safe, and with my mom through that time as well. And then one night, I came over and I found him in a really difficult spot, and he was by himself, and he had fallen, and he wasn't able to get up, and he just would get in these states where he would be frozen. And so I picked him up, and I walked with him, but kind of carried him into their bathroom, and I was cleaning him up and getting him changed, because he had kind of lost some of his function and capacity for urination and just different stuff that happens when your body's deteriorating. And I was getting my dad dressed again, and I was putting him in bed, and the Lord reminded me of what he had said all those years ago. You will father your father. And the response in my heart was, God, I didn't know this is what you meant. Mm-hmm. I thought it was going to look different. I wasn't disappointed or angry. The reality of that kind of sat in my lap. It was like looking in front of in a mirror and seeing myself and seeing the situation almost from a completely outside perspective. And I put my dad to bed, shed some tears, because it's painful to watch someone you love that's not able to do what they've always been able to do. And I remember putting my dad to bed, and I just prayed for him, for healing, because I didn't know if anything else had happened, just praying over him. And he was just about asleep, and I just said, I love you, Dad. I'll see you tomorrow. And he just ever so quietly said, "Thank you, Jesus." And there's those moments in life where you almost feel like you were saying something to me before we started, and you almost don't know if it really happened or if you dreamt it, because it feels so weighty. And that was one of those moments for me where I had to step back and say, boy, my perspective on what's happening in my life and the change that's happening in my life, or my struggle, or all of these things where my head is down and sort of buried, and my viewpoint is so limited. And it was one of those moments where you realize life is so much bigger, and there is so much more happening and at play than you ever realize. Yeah. And so much of that goes into the process of what it looks like to change and to experience transformation in your life. And in that moment, the culmination of that moment was, I feel like I went from being a son, which I will always be, but there was this transformational moment that felt like I went from a son to being a father. And, my kids are 7, 9, and 11. Our kids are great age. We have lots of fun. I am a father. I know that I'm a father. But there was a different moment of becoming a father when you get to this age, for anybody who's experienced it, where you're helping to parent your parents. It feels life feels backwards. Yeah. It feels upside down. It is completely disorienting. And it rocked me. And at the same time, there was this really strange peace that was there. I never regretted. I never had a hard time doing any of the things for my dad that I ended up doing until the very last breath that he took. It was a privilege to be with him, walking out life. Yeah. So, what does transformation look like? It looks a lot of different ways, but I know that it doesn't come without trial. I know that it doesn't come without struggle. I know that it doesn't come without some pain. And I know that it doesn't come without sometimes wishing you were in a different place.
That's how you know it's real.
Right?
I was just processing everything that you're saying, and the biggest question that comes to me is, what's the point?
Yeah.
And, we've talked about this at length and before, and one of those things that I had spoken of in the last podcast here was about hope. And if your identity is not anchored in some kind of a hope, then it's untethered. Mm-hmm. It's free flowing, and it moves from circumstance to circumstance, and that's really, really difficult. And I want to tackle that question in a second, about what is the point of transformation? Why are we doing this? Why do we care? Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about what just happened in my life over the last week, because I think it ties in, dovetails real nicely. Yeah. I had a conversation with my mom and dad recently about my life. Our life is literally, not figuratively, but literally in bankruptcy. And, you talk about rock bottom. This is about as rock bottom as I could never have imagined myself in this situation. We've been really, really close before, and I didn't know it. I'm way too headstrong to realize it. Yeah. And all the endurance training and stuff I endured through athletics was just, you keep going and you do not quit ever until the whistle stops. Yeah. And I took that into life. And my parents were asking me, why wouldn't you communicate this with us as you're going through it? Why are we the last ones to know? And the answer surprised them. I told them of a moment in college when they called me up and said, we're not going to pay for your school anymore, right while I was in the middle of it. And my whole life had led up to that point of feeling like I need to earn myself into school, get above a 4.0 GPA, be a star athlete, go on missions trips, do everything that a good kid should do to earn and deserve college. And that was the promise they gave me. We'll pay for your school if you go. So I did, and then they pulled it away from me right in the middle of my junior year. And I felt like the biggest injustice had ever happened in my life. And there was a shattering and, a splintering of me happened in that moment. So much so that I literally had amnesia of the whole situation until they brought it up, and they asked me if I knew why they had done that. And when they told me it was because they thought I needed to grow up more and that life had come a little too easy to me at that moment, they were afraid I was going to get complacent and not get a job someday and just keep skating through life. And, as I took this feeling of great injustice when I was hearing that just a couple days ago of, you saw me that way, even with all the accolades I had in my life. Everything was pointing to a diligent, hardworking individual who had been working since he was 14. And then that voice came of, you weren't good enough, is how I took it. And I internalized this truth about myself in that moment, that I do not deserve good things. And anything good that I have will go away because I don't deserve it. Yeah. And then I was praying, and God just showed me this bigger picture that every time your life has reset to zero, all the way to this point of bankruptcy, is because you believe that about yourself. So, it just made everything make sense. Why was I self-sabotaging so much? It was because I believed this. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. And the most amazing thing happened right after that when I saw that. I prayed and I forgave him, and I literally felt like I'd been towing this 18-wheeler behind me my whole life, trying to prove myself to people and to them that I am good enough. I have what it takes. I have skills. I have abilities and natural talents, and I'm good enough. But I could never prove it to myself because I believed that. So, pause that conversation of life and now tie these two scenarios together. What is the point of transformation? What's the point of going through it? Why not just numb it down? Why not pop a pill and get to the bottom of a bottle and just numb it out? Like why do we as dads have this privilege to grow, to not stay the same? So, Matt, what do you think about tackling that question? What does that look like for you? Why not stay as you were? Why do you care about changing?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. Number one, for me, I carried around the baggage of my past for a long time. And I carried around the things that I was ashamed of, that I knew I had hurt other people, that, it was devastating. It was embarrassing. That's that place right there, that shame will keep you contained. That shame will keep you locked up, feeling like you've got a, semi-truck attached to your back. And you've got to come to a place of deciding whether or not you want to continue to live that way. And I began to see it. Really, it took other people showing me that something else was possible. And when I came walking into a church for the very first time in my adulthood, I was looking at people like, I know what you're about. I know you people. You are religious. You are hypocrites, and I have you all figured out. And it really frustrated me when over and over again I continued to be wrong. And it took, for me, one of the things it took was truly seeing there was another way, seeing someone else take an interest in me and beginning to speak into my life and beginning to care for no other reason than he cared, which didn't make sense. And so, there's a scripture that talks about how we will comfort others with the comfort that we've received. And I can't give you something I don't have. I could tell you that I'm going to give you $10, but if I don't have $10 in my wallet, I'm not going to give you $10. But if I've got $10 in my wallet and I pull it out and I can hand it to you, that's a real true promise. And you begin to learn from me like that my words mean something. Mm-hmm. And when I say something, I'm gonna do it. But when you don't see that modeled for you, when you don't see follow through, it's one other area that you just don't have to have any hope. It means kind of like what you said. I've got to do it on my own. If I don't, nobody else will do it for me. And so for me, part of the point of hope is it fixes me to something outside of my circumstance that is bigger, more steady, and more stable. That when the stuff of life begins to happen, when death comes to those who you're close with, when you don't get that job, when you're dealing with bankruptcy, when that stuff happens, because it's going to happen, that I'm not lost in it, that I'm not swallowed up and I'm not drowning in it, even though it feels like I am. But we have to see that from outside of where we are. Something has to come in and reveal that to us. And now, I'm a pastor, so I'm going to say it just the way that I think you would, and others will see this as well. That's what God did. It was a sin entered the world. God sent his son from outside of the world into the world to reveal to us how great and vast and massive his love is for us. And Jesus didn't come just to die on the cross. That wasn't the fullness of why he came. He came to show us what life could look like and what was possible. And so for me, that place of hope for me personally was I looked under every rock and I looked everywhere else. And I had to come to that place of recognizing that it took someone else entering into my life and showing me something I'd never seen before. And not just like, I'm just going to, it's a show because I want you to think something about me. It was true and real and authentic. And there are a lot of things in our world today that are not true and real and authentic. They are pseudo, they're false. And, a lot of them we use to make ourselves feel good and feel better. But the point of that hope and the point of that transformation and longing for change in my life is not just so that I can be better. It's because there is purpose in me growing, because beyond me growing, there's opportunity for me to see others go beyond what I could ever do or dream. And as a dad, this is a real easy thing. I want my sons to go farther than I could ever ask or imagine. Yeah. And the hard part, here's the tension with being a dad, right? James Dobson or somebody said that the point of being a parent, and specifically sometimes the parent of boys, not that there aren't some crazy, wild little girls out there who are equally as energetic. I know you know, David. But it's to keep them alive.
Yeah. Survival is number one.
They're, if I can keep them alive until they are 18, I feel like there's some winning in that. But here's the thing. Society and the world right now, this is so real and true. We want to, the whole Me Too movement and all these things that are happening, we want to emasculate men because there is such a real false belief about what being a man really is. Yeah. Right? Like being a man is somebody who's tough, who doesn't put up with stuff, who can talk to women or other people however they want. Oh, man. It's so far from the truth, right? We say that men don't cry. We say that, men don't, whatever it is. And at the same time, there is something very real and true and fierce that is put into us as men. And that is being taken away. And we're wanting that to be taken away because we see how dangerous it can be when it's twisted the other way.
Right.
So what's hope? What's the purpose of change and transformation? I mean, it comes down to that. It comes down to really, when everything else is stripped away, to really being able to walk and live in that place of it is okay. In fact, if we don't take risks, we're going to die. Yeah. If we don't seek out growth and change and constantly be learning, we're going to die. Right. And that is not going to be passed on to my kids or to my grandkids or to the kids in our neighborhood who may not see that because they don't have a dad at home. I'll never forget, I was so embarrassed as a dad one day when one of our neighbors, the kids were over playing, and he lives in a different kind of situation where he's actually living with his grandparents who take care of him, and his mom was a teenage mom, doesn't live in the home, lives in Las Vegas or somewhere, and his dad is just not around very much. And the boys were kind of asking him questions. My kids were asking him questions about that, and it pained my heart, but one of my sons looked at him and said, "Why doesn't your mom love you?" because she doesn't live with him. And I mean, as a dad, you're like, oh, can we put those words back? And so I'm trying to intervene and figure that out. But to my son, love means proximity. Love means involvement. Like that's just what he knows. So he was just kind of going like, oh my gosh, wrestling with how his mom couldn't love him because they don't live together. Wow. So then I'm trying to figure that out, how to talk that through with my son, right? These are the things that happens. Your kids do stuff that just, you just wish you could put it back in the tube, like it's out. But that change and transformation that happens in me, now I get to turn that and start to help my son see someone else's needs and their situation so that he can begin to think about what that looks like and see someone else from a different perspective. And we've oh my gosh, we've had so many situations like that happen before that just rock you as a parent. But we need to see our kids released to live in and be the fullness of who they are. And our education system doesn't necessarily support that really either. And so it's kind of like, where are those opportunities where we're really looking for and creating a place of freedom for our kids and for the next generation, for girls to be girls and boys to be boys, and really to know what that looks like. And it doesn't mean that girls can't adventure and get dirty in that. No, like there is an adventurous heart and spirit in all of us to some degree. It goes in different directions. So to me, that place of hope and transformation, it is about change. I want to be less like I am. I want to be tomorrow. I don't want to wake up and be frustrated with my kids because they're doing stuff in the morning. I want to shift that tomorrow. So it's that constant place of coming back to wanting to grow and see and know more so that I can be that reflection. I don't want my words to be empty words. They've been that. For a long time, they've been that. I tell my kids this has been a topic of conversation in our house for a while. Guys, we don't want to yell. We do not want to yell, but it feels like unless we raise our voice, you guys, your ears don't work. So how do we do that different? And we sit around the table with some problem solving. And they've confronted us. You said you don't want to yell. You're right. I don't. Please forgive me. We want to figure out how to do this differently. And it's also good to share weaknesses with each other too, right? That's transformational. Going through this process of losing a dad, my sons have watched me process grief. They've watched me lose one of the most important people in my life. And there's been times where a song comes on the radio and I just start crying in the car, and I can feel my sons watching me, learning that it's okay to express emotion, that it's okay to feel deeply. And I mean, I'm sitting in the car, this happened just the other day, and my son reaches over and puts his hand on my arm because he sees me and knows what I'm feeling, that I miss my dad desperately, And it was like, wow, he's getting it. There's a place of empathy and a place of love and compassion, but there's also this deep place of continuing to press on and growing. And it takes vigilance, and it takes endurance, and it takes fighting through the struggle, right? And it takes, just like you were sharing, it takes being willing and open to see things that you don't know that you ever really wanted to know, but you can't live anymore without knowing it. Like, I have to know. And then it rocks you, right? I mean, it rocked your world for several hours. And then all of a sudden it's like, I don't have to carry this anymore. That's not who I am. But at the same time, it has helped shape you. It's helped shape you. Can we do without that? Well, we can. I mean, we can. I see people doing it all the time. Our whole society is all about producing things that make life easier, more packageable, single serving, feeling like we rely less on people and we can live in a more disconnected way and do whatever we want. And there couldn't be anything further from the truth.
Right. I just wanted to touch on one thing that you talked about with hope, and it's something outside of you that you're connected to. It's not, I want to just kind of debunk this whole thing of, as a man, to become who you're really supposed to be, you got to dig deep and look inside. And everything that the world teaches us is it's all in you. It's already there, right? And the result of what just happened to me the last couple of days was from, I believe, a prayer that I prayed probably 3 months ago. It said, God, search my heart and know me. I want you to know me. I'm not going to dig in there. You're the one who can look in there. Because the further you dig into yourself, it's so much confusion, and it's this black hole, and it's weird. There's weird stuff that happens when you start to get really introspective. And I want to just kind of talk about identity for a second, because I think it's so pivotal in this conversation we're having. If we're not connected to something bigger than ourselves, maybe it's a mentor who sees you a certain way and says, Matt, like a coach, right? I loved my coaches because they always saw my ability and they knew how to crack the whip or kick my ass so hard.
Your potential.
That they knew the potential. Yeah. And they saw it and they had wisdom to see it. And I respected them and they drew it out of me and they always called me up to that level. Yeah. And as men, if we don't have mentors around us, I think we're losing before we start the race in a lot of ways. If we don't have something to grow up into and to attain to, and I'll just say it right now, I mean, the best identity that you can ever have is to know how your Father sees you in heaven, who He sees you as, and that identity, and then pray into that, grow into that, seek and desire, how do I become more of that man that you see me as, that you love me so much you sent your son for me to become like, right? And then as we raise our kids, we get to raise our kids in the way that they should go. So we got to know them and who they are and never stop reminding them of who they're really made to be. Yeah. Like when we discipline in our home, I'm not disciplining them because they did a bad thing. I talk to them and say, this isn't who you are. This is not your real identity. Because I want to call them up into a place, not out and away from something bad, but up into something solid and tangible that they can hold on to as an identity for the rest of their life. Yeah. And so as fathers, we are called to greatness. We're called to something better. And I think the whole point of this transformation is so that we can start to see men not through the filter of our own junk, not through the pain of our own past and the circumstances that are screaming out to us, but we can see them for who they really are and who they're really made to be so that they then can go extend and rescue men out of really horrible situations and rescue children out of bad places. And I mean, isn't that the point of all of this? Yeah. That we can love other people selflessly? But how can we love people selflessly when we're so self-centered and concerned with our own problems? We can't even look outside of ourselves. Yeah, it's true. Going back to the introspection and such, I think that one of the things that I see that going lots of different ways. In some ways, it gets odd and difficult. There is, I would say though, or I've experienced the value of delving in with other people and really beginning to open yourself up. And this takes a lot of vulnerability to invite people into that space in our lives where we're really willing to ask for feedback and go there with people. And, I've had several people, one guy in particular that walked with me in the first months and weeks and then into years when I first began to try and follow Jesus. And he was so patient. But Daniel would sit there with me and ask me really hard questions that I didn't know how to answer. And it caused me to have to begin to invite God into that space. You said scripture from Proverbs about, you know me, Lord, search me, draw those things out. And sometimes that's confronting. Man, my uncle is a movie producer, and he produced one of my favorite movies as a kid was The Never-Ending Story, right? And it gets to that place in the end where the kid that's the star, one of the stars of the movie, Atreyu, is in, and he ends up, confronting what he thinks is, the end of the movie and seeing himself in this mirror. And it's this whole journey about self-discovery. And there's a kid on the outside of the book. There's a lot to the movie in that sense. And the reality of being willing and courageous enough to see ourselves as we are
And yet to have people in our lives, as you said, that see us as we are, but they also see beyond just that current moment, just that current mess, just that current struggle, just that current place of stuckness.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, part of what I feel like life is about is reaching into that space where other people are and just pulling them out of that. You know, I admit I've crawled back into that space before in my life, you know. Some of this other stuff is just too hard, because it is hard. But there is no other battle worth fighting for, because it is for our hearts, and it is for our future, and it is for our families. And you're talking about identity and the world right now, everything that's happening in our society and in different parts of the world, it is all about putting a different mark on people. That more or less you can be whoever and whatever you want.
Right.
And there is a freedom in being able to be who and what we were created to be. But it is so distorted in the world today and so twisted that if we don't have people speaking into our lives, if we don't have people challenging us, if we're not willing to let those people into our lives, man,
yeah,
it's dangerous.
We can't do this dad journey alone. We can't do this Dadstrong thing alone. You will not be strong if you're by yourself.
Yeah.
And I've learned that the hard way. I've lived 13 plus years of my last 13 years trying to live alone, trying to do it on my own, under my own strength, and time and time and time again, tripping up and falling on my face and asking what just happened.
Yeah.
Well, I should just maybe not hit that pothole next time, and then I'll try and run harder, and you know. But if you don't have people around you to call you up or to look into your heart and look into you and say, that's just not who you are. What you're doing right now and the way you're treating your wife or your kids, people can be that vulnerable with you. I think we're missing out on something. Yeah. Major.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was sitting with a friend this afternoon and just kind of telling him about what the last year has entailed. And he was like, man, I told him, I said, there were just certain moments that I didn't want to be around people. Mm-hmm. Like at one point, my wife came home to me and said, okay, hun, you know, our church was amazing, just told me to rest. We lost my dad, and then, you know, 5 weeks later, we lost my wife's grandmother, who was just absolutely dear, a huge part of our lives, and it just took so much out of us. And so our church staff said, please, you know, we want you to take some time and rest and relax. And it was really interesting because for someone who doesn't kind of like sitting around very much, it felt like I was not doing something that I should be doing, and you're wrestling with guilt and feeling all this stuff. But I just got to this place where like I didn't want to see anybody. It was easier to talk to a perfect stranger than it was someone who knew me. Mm-hmm. And, you know, finally my wife came home and was like, okay, listen, you need to talk to one person that's not me or our kids every day. I'm getting really worried about you, and I know you're out like shopping and doing stuff, like that's fine, but you're not letting anybody into that space with you. You're not inviting anybody into that space with you. That's not okay. It's not okay. And my response, I'm pretty sure, was, all right, fine, I'll start tomorrow.
Diet starts tomorrow,
You
kids.
know, it's kind of like those signs you see, free beer tomorrow, you know, hanging on.
Yeah.
And but I knew that it wasn't right. And this friend of mine at lunch today was like, man, you know, I hope that you feel and you know, like we can't we can't do this stuff alone. We've got to have that. And so even when we don't feel like it, it's just like working out and exercising, man. The day that you don't feel like doing it, that's the day that you know you've got to do it. Yeah. To put those feelings aside and say, I've got to go do this. That conversation you don't want to have with your wife or a coworker or someone else, the more that you put those conversations off, the bigger they get. That's pressing into that place of hope. That brings you into that place of transformation to say, I'm not going to stay as I am. I'm going to choose to take the step that goes outside of myself, that's stretching me beyond what feels like is comfortable and what I feel like I can handle. And that is the place of growth.
Yeah.
It is living and being on the edge of what we know and are comfortable with. That's where that place of growth happens. And it, you know, hope fits right into that.
Yeah.
we start having conversations with our kids about sex and about bodies and about relationships. I mean, that feels way outside of what feels comfortable.
Yeah.
But I know that just like me, if we don't have those conversations, if we avoid them because they're awkward, they're going to figure it out from somewhere else, and it will be a distorted view of what is true and real.
Yeah.
We had that conversation with one of our kids, and then realized he went and had conversation with one of his friends at school because he clearly knew lots about body parts and he knew about sex at this point. And it was a little awkward when that kid, our son shouldn't have done this, but whatever. That kid had not had the conversation with his parents. So he got an anatomy lesson at school, but you know what? I wouldn't take it back. We've created a safe environment for our kids to have conversations. And even though we mess up constantly, they continue to come back because they know it's safe.
Yeah.
And we can have those conversations. And that builds hope, and it builds trust, and that creates room for transformation in the midst of that awkward, difficult moments. That is where the stuff is happening,
Yeah. Yeah, that process of iron sharpening iron is not one. Yeah, it's not down pillows rubbing together. It's if you ever run your hand down some jagged iron.
Yeah.
I literally had a spike go through my finger, I don't know, 6 months ago when I was moving an iron chair in the backyard to get it out of the way of my daughter. It ripped through and the deepest parts of my finger, and it was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had. So iron sharpening iron is a painful process, and it's jagged and it's messy, especially when it's with two human people. But man, is it worth it?
Yeah.
No
doubt.
It's so good. Yeah.
No doubt.
Well, I know your time is precious, Matt. I want to honor that and just thank you for being vulnerable and open and having the hard conversation here, and being a good example as a dad that can walk through really difficult things and come out on the other side and say, you know what, I'm better for it.
Yeah.
I'm not a bruised person who will never be whole. At some point, I'm somebody who's moving towards greatness, and you definitely are that. And so I just want to thank you for being on here.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. I hope that it's helpful. That's part of the point of it. That a lot of the stuff that we're going through, we think it's for us and about us, and it's growth. But a lot of times, it's for the next person you're going to encounter that needs to know that there's hope beyond what they're dealing with right now.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I am so grateful you got to hear what we just went through. And if you love what you just heard, come join us over at dadstrong.com and grab yourself some swag, grab a hat, a shirt, sport the brand that is helping dads be strong for their families, changing the world one household at a time. Thanks again for listening, and hope to see you over at dadstrong.com.